We introduced the Meshlet Shading Atlas, a texture-space shading method that mitigates common issues such as sampling distortion and unnecessary overshading. The key advantage of the Meshlet Shading Atlas is that it combines large groups of primitives into meshlets. This is a straightforward extension to standard texture-space shading pipelines and exploits previously missed potential by increasing the sampling efficiency at a limited shading budget. First, we subdivide the scene geometry into sufficiently small triangles. Then, we cluster the whole scene, with the goal to generate groups of primitives that are as large as possible, while still being flat and roughly rectangular to ensure optimal space usage within the texture atlas. During runtime, we determine the screen space size of each visible meshlet and determine the optimal transformation to map and shade each meshlet into texture space. Finally, once the meshlets have been shaded into the atlas, novel views can be generated by bilinearly sampling from the atlas. The Meshlet Shading Atlas covers a large region of previously unexplored space in texture space shading. While previous methods mainly transform and shade in small groups of pixels or few triangles, the Meshlet Shading Atlas allows for arbitrary mapping transformations and dynamic meshlet sizes much larger than previously explored. This enables the Meshlet Shading Atlas to be tailored to a variety of use cases, such as real-time rendering with temporal caching and accumulation, streaming, and virtual reality. We evaluate the Meshlet Shading Atlas against a selection of texture space methods by comparing against the 4x supersampled forward rendering reference. We limit the amount of fragment shader invocations to simulate a realistic scenario in real-time rendering where fixed shading budgets are necessary for consistency. In Sponsor, the Meshlet Shading Atlas reproduces the scene very accurately compared to the reference, with only high-frequency details on the curtains being slightly blurrier compared to the 4x supersampled reference. Compared to the standard Shading Atlas, the Meshlet Shading Atlas preserves more fine detail, as the standard Shading Atlas clusters primitives in fixed layouts of 1 to 3 triangles, which introduces a significant amount of sampling distortion. In Robot Lab, the Meshlet Shading Atlas outperforms all the other methods, and no major texture sampling artifacts are visible compared to the reference. The Shading Atlas also performs well in terms of quality, but is again slightly worse than the Meshlet Shading Atlas, even when shading an overall smaller visible set of geometry. Texel shading suffers the most from a limited shading budget, as it shades in tiles of 8x8 pixels and requires trilinear filtering for optimal quality. Because of that, it requires a significant reduction in texture resolution to reach the shading budget, which has a dramatic impact on image quality. The space scene showcases dynamic lighting and very high-frequency textures that provide a challenging test for all texture space shading methods. Compared to the reference, the Meshlet Shading Atlas slightly blurs the high-frequency content, but still outperforms all competing methods in overall image quality. The standard Shading Atlas performs well, but is considerably blurrier compared to the Meshlet Shading Atlas. To conclude, the Meshlet Shading Atlas is a flexible texture space shading approach that is robust in a wide variety of use cases and tolerates limited shading budgets very well. By clustering large groups of primitives into meshlets, it covers a previously untouched region in the domain of texture space shading and takes advantage of recent hardware support for mesh shading.